This is Paul Johnson with the Optimistic American. We have a guest today that has interesting lessons for you in your marriage, in your business, in your personal life, but they came from his life as an addict, life and being involved in crime and doing a wide variety of things that he shouldn't have done that had a very destructive effect on his life. Alan Fahringer has a life that is exemplary for us of the things that we shouldn't do and the things that we should do. He puts a big focus on two concepts of integrity and accountability, but he does a good job of also explaining what that means. You'll hear him talk about things like the bench in this show. If you like what it is that we're doing, push that subscribe button. I'm just an ordinary optimistic American who still believes that the United States is a great cause for good, but that only happens if people inside of it recognize their own self-agency. We're on with the show with Alan. Thanks for being here. Well, Alan, I'd like to welcome you to the Optimistic American today.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here.
All right, now I'm going to put this question a little rough, and I'm going to ask for your indulgence right off the top of the bat. But my interest in interviewing you was to figure out whether or not all of us can learn from someone who is an addict. Now, in saying that, I know that you are a recovering addict, but in my experience, most people who've been through any type of program, they tend to believe that once you're an addict, you're always one. So I'd love to have your opinion on that. But what I want to start with, after you maybe help me on that and seeing if I was appropriate in the way that I asked that question, is to start with your beginnings, how you begin to figure out first that you were an addict and what problems that led to.
Okay, that's a fair question. And I think it was Dean Martin that said once, experience comes from poor judgment. Good judgment comes from experience. So if that's the barometer, then I think criminals and addicts, or former criminals and addicts like me, are a great resource. We're like mistake experts. We have so much experience doing so many things wrong that if we finally do get through the abyss and come back to a life that's worth having, then we have so much to share. Because I think a stronger person is one that's been knocked to their knees or had their teeth knocked out and got back up to fight another day than somebody that's never met a tough challenge.
Yeah.
So that would be my answer to that question.
Yeah.
So
let's start with your story.
Well, my story is, the only remarkable thing about my story, Paul, is that it's not really that remarkable. And by that, I mean that in the 15 years that I was in the therapeutic community universe, but first as a student, a broken man that, was looking for help, and then later as a teacher, a mentor, and finally as a director of a couple of different therapeutic communities, I found that I wasn't that extraordinary. I was a good kid, let's call it. When I was young, I had parents that were together. I had two sisters that adored their big brother. I got good grades in school. I had lots of friends. I had every reason to succeed in life as I look back compared to other people I've met on the road since. But that's not what happened. I started at a very young age, and I don't know why, but at 12 or maybe 11, 12, 13, that area, started taking liquor out of my dad's cabinet when he wasn't looking. I started smoking cigarettes with my good friend David Garcia behind 7-Eleven. And then my other buddy Roger introduced us to marijuana, which I could even argue wasn't really marijuana, but we thought at the time that it was. And so it was the same thing. And so I started experimenting with, bad behavior, more so than the cigarettes and the marijuana and the liquor, which is how I started getting off of track. I look back now, and I think more importantly, it was this sneaky behavior, the duplicitous behavior, the little fibs that turned into a life of lying. That's what it was more than anything else. The drugs, the alcohol, and everything that came directly because of that was almost ancillary to the bad behavior, the lack of character, the lack of integrity and accountability that I exhibited at an early age that just followed me and kind of became a way of life until I finally got stopped in my tracks at 50 years old and began to get some help. And I presume we'll talk about
All
that
right.
more.
Yeah. Tell me about what stopped you in your tracks. So you're living this life. Let's go to the point in time where you have to confront it, where it becomes a problem.
Okay, so like I said, as a young teenager, I started, bad behaviors, lying to my parents, and smoking, and marijuana and cigarettes and liquor, and it turned into other drugs. By the time I graduated from high school, I was a full-blown addict. But I was always, for one reason or another, able to stay just a step or two ahead of the law and myself and all the people around me. I stayed well hidden in my duplicitous life, my double life, if you will, until my 30s. And I went through sort of every drug that came along back in the 70s when I was growing up. Um, when I was in my 30s, I was introduced to methamphetamine, and that was a whole different animal. That's kind of when my little, duplicitous life became a full-blown dumpster fire. And that led to a couple of failed marriages, a couple of ruined careers. It led to about 25 arrests along the way, a year in prison light, I call it. It's a state jail in Texas, which is technically prison, but not like bad boy prison. It's just everybody there has a 2-year sentence or less, so everybody's trying to act right. You're not around anybody that's doing life and doesn't care. But prison nonetheless. Then, after I got out, I wound up in 2005 being arrested 3 times in a span of 11 months for trafficking and distribution of methamphetamine and all the other ancillary charges that go with that kind of thing. To make a long story short, after that third arrest in 2005, I was in jail and woke up that day, that one morning, facing 13 felonies and, at least on paper, 51 and a half years in prison, I think it was. Now, I wasn't going to do all that time. Some of that would have been pled down, maybe even most of it. But no matter what, I was going to prison for a long, long time. And I was already 50 years old. So you do the math, and it was a bad day. I wound up in front of a really empathetic judge that kind of saved me from myself. He looked at my jacket and could see that up until that last year of my life, which was a total train wreck, that I hadn't really been in that much serious trouble. Not felonies, just misdemeanors and shoplifting and forgetting to pay for stuff at Home Depot on the way out the door, all that kind of just basic drug addict behavior. But nothing really serious like those last 3 arrests over that 11-month period. And because of that, I believe, he decided to let me go to Delancey Street instead of prison. And Delancey Street is sort of the mother of all therapeutic communities, which is what I really want to talk today about. When I said my story isn't remarkable, my personal story isn't remarkable. I've met a million Allens along the way, and I've talked to a million parents that have an Allen as a son, and they think it was their fault that he got off the beaten path. And that's always what broke my heart the worst. I didn't feel bad for the drug addict. That was his problem. He created that mess. He's going to have to work his way out of it. But I always felt bad for the parents that never had any sort of idea of where they failed or went wrong. And in the therapeutic community jobs that I had, I feel like at least half of my responsibility was to make parents understand that, one, it wasn't their fault, and two, their wayward son or daughter had no idea in the middle of their addiction what kind of burden they were putting on those parents. I said, as wrong as it is, and as much as it's all their fault and none of it's yours, they're really not even aware of it until they get clean and sober and get some good time and start reinventing their life. They're never going to appreciate what they put you through. But if we can get them there, they will, and I promise you'll have them back in your life. But anyway, I got sent to Delancey Street instead of prison. And a therapeutic community is different than typical rehab. I'm all over the place.
That's okay.
But I think this is. I think
it's important.
Worth making. Yeah, it will build the rest of our conversation, I believe, because I really feel vehemently that the drug treatment industry in the United States is completely broken. 30 and 60 and 90-day little spin dry programs are not going to fix somebody like I was that's been doing this stuff for 30 years or even 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is. Just getting me clean and sober in 30 days is not the answer. And beyond that, the entire system is built around funding. Where I go and if I'm allowed to go there at all depends on whether I have insurance or rich parents. And once the $30,000 or whatever they charge a month runs out, I'm supposed to be miraculously cured on that 30th or 90th day, and I have to leave because I don't have any more money. They have to fill that bed with another head that has money. And when you have a system that's built around funding someone's ability to pay rather than the needs and the progress of the participant, that's all bad. I mean, drug treatment centers in this country, they'll stand on a mountaintop and yell to the masses if they get a 5 to 10% or 12% success rate. A therapeutic community has about a 50% success rate if you only stay 2 years. If you stay 3 or 4 years, it goes up to 70 something and 80 something percent. That is amazing. And to go to a therapeutic community is absolutely free for somebody like me. You don't have to pay to go, and you can stay as long as you like. You can stay until you're ready to leave. And that's what people need. Usually it's a 2-year minimum, 3-year minimum commitment. So it's long enough not to just get me clean and sober, which is awesome. And everybody needs to get clean and sober to start. But you can't just get clean and sober. You've got to change who you are. You've got to affect behaviors until they become what's normal for you. You don't need to stay long enough just to know what you need to do. You need to stay long enough that it becomes who you are. And those are the differences between typical drug rehab or treatment centers and a therapeutic community. Now, before you even ask me, well, if it's free, how does it get funded? And here's the beautiful part about a therapeutic community, besides the fact that I can stay as long as I need to fix my broken life, is therapeutic communities all run businesses to support their operational expenses. Moving companies are popular, thrift stores, restaurants, construction companies, all kinds of different things, telemarketing, anything, any kind of business that is kind of low tech, if you will, but just requires somebody to show up on time with a good attitude and work hard and not get caught up with their fellow employees. Just put in a solid day's work, go home on time, come back the next day on time. Those are the kind of businesses that are very effective in a therapeutic community. And those students get to go to work every day. Most of people like me, at least for 20 years of my life, I didn't have a paycheck. I was slinging dope or selling stolen merchandise. I mean, I got by, but it wasn't on the right side of the tracks. It was all duplicitous and sneaky, and it didn't have any structure, didn't have any integrity or accountability to it. And so when you go to a therapeutic community, after you've been there just a little bit and kind of get clean and sober, they start putting you in these businesses. So you get to learn how to show up on time. You get to learn how to play nice with others. You get to learn how to be responsible and eventually for other people. Each one teach one. After you've been there a minute, you show the person behind you who's just got there what you've learned. And everybody does that. They say the best way to retain something is to teach it after you know it. And the therapeutic community does that better than any other environment. And so criminals and drug addicts who maybe spent most of their life in prison, maybe they were like me and just out on the street. I mean, at the end of my road, I was living in a storage unit. And that's after having a successful career or two, a nice marriage, a house on the hill, all that stuff. In the end, I had tumbled down to not even having a keychain because I didn't have anything to unlock except my storage unit. And I was living in there before I wound up getting arrested those times like I talked about before. So people like that living such a hard scrabble life with no structure, going into a therapeutic community where everything is extremely structured. Every minute is accounted for. Every move you make is monitored by everybody around you. In anything short of perfection, you're called on it. If you're 1 minute late, you might as well be 3 days late because the accountability is going to be the same. If you tell somebody something that's a little fib, it might as well have been a lie about your entire life, because you're going to be held to account as if it were. So that high degree of conformity to having integrity, to telling the truth, to being accountable, to being on time, to saying what you mean and meaning what you say, and everybody holding each other to account and nitpicking each other and getting in groups 3 times a week to point out each other's shortcomings, while having experienced it myself and knowing how absolutely brutal it was, especially in the beginning. I look back on it now as what saved my life. It's the way I live my life now, and it's why I see so many really good people out there just doing what they're doing, but they've never been held to that degree of accountability. They've never had 20 people in a room yelling at them, telling them they're a loser and telling them they didn't really do that. And you didn't really, that's not what you said anyway. And oh my gosh, it takes a couple years to get used to it. And your brain, being basically a self-preservation mechanism, it learns very quickly that it doesn't like to get yelled at by 20 people simultaneously. It learns very quickly that it doesn't like to do extra duty when all your other peers are watching football on a Sunday and you're mopping floors. It learns very quickly, you know what, it's just not worth it. I'm going to start telling the truth. I'm going to do what the heck I'm supposed to do, and I'm going to do it on time. And then you practice that over and over, day after day, week after week, month after month, even year after year, until it's not just what you know, but it's who you are.
All right. So I have a very large family. I have 9 brothers and sisters, 9 double cousins who lived in the house next to us. We've had every problem you could ever possibly imagine, because you get enough people, sooner or later, you're going to find all the problems in any given group. One of the things that I found is that like things like interventions, they just don't work, and we've tried different groups and different therapists and different tries. The reality is, unless somebody wants to fix themselves, it's really hard to get them to fix themselves. You can't want it for them. But in the instance that you're talking about, what would have happened if you would have left that facility? If you would have just said after a month, "Oh, I'm done with this. I'm not going to put up with it."
Well, that's funny that you bring that up. But first, I'd like to touch on the 9 of your siblings, all having to have an intervention with one guy. That guy's on the hot seat right then. And everybody in that room is focused on his defects. But as he's sitting there, maybe trying to hear them, but being a little defensive, because that's natural. The other 8 people that are yelling at him, they all have their defects too. And they're giving themselves a pass because they're all ganging up on that one guy. That's why those interventions don't work. But if everybody was held to the same degree of accountability, and if all 8 people got to tell him where his shortcomings were, but then they had to sit there and listen to those other 8 people, including him, tell them what their shortcomings were, that changes the dynamic. Now everybody's not attacking, everybody needs to be fair. And people aren't going to attack him if they know in 5 minutes they're going to have to sit there and hear the same thing. When they're done with him and he looks at her and says, "Yeah, okay, I did that, but what about what you did yesterday? You did the same thing with me yesterday. What about that?" Now everybody's accountable. And when the group dynamic is all about the same degree of accountability and integrity, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that person would be willing to listen to the criticism if he knew that everybody else was going to be held to the same standard. So that's the dynamic that's at play. But it is built around the boundaries that you just mentioned. I'll tell you for myself. The only thing that kept me at Delancey Street, especially for that first year, because I was older than most people, I was 50. A lot of those people there were in their early 20s. I was just this old broken down drug addict that took 50 years to get in trouble and, had all kinds of bad habits and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to hear about it. But if I left, I had to go to prison. And so 2 years in Delancey Street, or maybe 18 years in prison, or whatever it would have been, a lot longer than 2 years, I was going to sit there and listen to it, because even before I felt the magic start to happen, even before I got to the point that I thought, I like this, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, I knew that 2 years was shorter than 10 or 15 or 18. And so in the beginning, when I didn't really think there was anything wrong with me and I wasn't really about change, I was just about doing my time and then getting back out to, I don't know, my storage unit again and picking up where I left off. I was still going to stay there because 2 years is better than 10 in prison. The funny thing is, though, when you're around people that are just like you, not some chick in a lab coat that learned about drug addiction in a textbook in college, or some doctor that has no idea who he's talking to, and you pretty soon you're taking their lunch money. It's therapists and a lot of people in treatment centers. If you're a hardened drug addict and criminal that's been roaming the streets for years and years and years, you don't take those people seriously. They have no credibility with you, and you can BS your way right past and over and through everything they get you to say. You know what they want to hear. You tell them that. You get through the 90 days, and you go back to whatever you were doing eventually. I mean, I don't mean to sound defeatist about this, but I've done all that, and I've seen it all literally thousands of times. And so I know that that's the truth. But when you're sitting in a circle of people that are just like you, that have done more prison than you, that have done more drugs than you, that have done more crime than you, have been caught more times than you, and somehow they've changed, and somehow they advocate these principles of integrity and accountability, you can't look at them and say, but you don't know what it's like to be me, and you don't know how rough it is, because they do know, and they tell you in very colorful vernacular to sit down and shut up, that you can do it too if you want it bad enough. Quit trying. Nobody cares. We're not buying what you're selling. This isn't a rehab. Shut up. And you don't have anywhere to go, and you have to listen to it, and you have to do what they say. But the funny thing about it is, when you see people that were more broken than you, that are now leading law-abiding, respectful lives, I mean, they're still in the therapeutic community, but now they're in positions of authority, they're in mentorship positions. You can tell unequivocally that they really do give a shit about what happens to you. And maybe that's the first time you felt like that about somebody in a long time. It's like, wow, if that guy can do it, maybe I can do it. You get this sort of flicker of inspiration. And you see people that have integrity, that are telling the truth. And the guys, he's tatted up all the way to the top of his chin, down sleeved on both hands. And, you already know his story. And this guy's walking the walk and talking the talk, and righteous as the day is long. All of a sudden, you run out of excuses for why you can't do the same thing. And I'll tell you, I'll never forget this. You're going to laugh at me, but this is a big deal to me, right? Because I've never had any integrity in my life. And after I'd been at Delancey Street for, I don't know, maybe it was 6 months or something, I was working in the office building part of the facility, and there was this bathroom. And, that's where you went down the stairs and into the bathroom. And the stuff was back here. But when you came out, it had this long cabinet where you washed your hands and stuff. And it had one of those trash cans which was just like a hole in the countertop. You know what I mean? And that's where you threw your paper towels or whatever when you were done. And I would always do it, a little routine, and I'd wash my hands and I'd get the thing, and I'd be walking by that hole as I was finishing. And as I walked out the door, I would turn around and toss it back to that hole. And half the time I would make it, half the time I would miss it. But I didn't care because I knew somebody would come along and clean it up, right? And I just keep on walking. One day I did that and I missed. And I got about 3 steps out the door and I turned around. I went and got the paper towel and I put it in the hole. They say integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's there to see whether you did or not. And that is the day, and I will never forget that day, that I decided I wanted to be about integrity. And I've never looked back. It felt so good. It felt like a drug. And ever since then, I've wanted more and more of it. Now, the caveat is I still fall short every single day. But that paper towel, picking it up and putting in that hole, became sort of a metaphor for the way I've tried to live my life ever since then. And that's one of the lessons that a therapeutic community tries to beat into people that have never had integrity or accountability. accountability part would be if somebody asked me later, hey, did you throw your paper towel in the trash can? The Alan for 50 years before that would have said, sure, why not? No, that must have not been my paper towel because mine went in the hole. Accountability means, yeah, I missed it. I should have gone back and did it. That's on me. So those are the two ingredients, all explained in a paper towel.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right. So, when we started this conversation, you talked about how you have noticed that in that particular environment, you saw drug addicts and criminals who actually were able to gain integrity as well as accountability. But when you came out and you began to look around as you left the program, you began to recognize that that was more than just a problem for addicts. Talk to me about that, if you would.
Well, so I don't think I'm holier than thou by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not being judgmental when I'm saying that. I'm just saying that I've made observations, and it's been about 3 years since I left Red Barn Academy, the last therapeutic community I worked at. And I think I should say that it is not untypical for staff members to live on site. I mean, you're all in. It's basically a lifestyle. So I sort of lived in that bubble for the better part of 15 years. And so I almost kind of forgot what it was like to not be around high accountability and high integrity, because that's all we preach all day, every day. Our whole life is about holding people to account and helping them not make the same mistakes twice. And like I said before, a rising tide lifts all boats, and you get used to living in a high degree of accountability. You kind of forget that not everywhere is like that. So about 3 years ago, when I left Red Barn, my wife and I began a estate sale company. And so I'm dealing with all kinds of, vendors and resellers and customers and clients and things like that. And I couldn't help but notice that a lot of people were a little soft around the edges. Very few people are punctual. And everybody's got an excuse, right? Oh, it was traffic. Oh, the dog ate my homework. And I always say that, they always have a reason, I should say. But I say reasons are really just excuses with lipstick. The bottom line is, I don't care if there was traffic. You knew there was going to be traffic. You drive on I-15 every day. If you were responsible, you would bake that into your drive time. So if it happened, you'd still be on. And that's what we would preach at a TC. But people don't live like that. They just come tooling in and they just excuse themselves from being late with no regard that they've held everybody up for 5 or 10 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever it is. And then they just kind of move on like it was no big deal. When in my mind, because of the way I lived for 15 years, it's a really big deal. I want to give them a haircut right there on the spot. A haircut is just getting yelled at. I want to give them a haircut right on the spot and tell them that their reason is BS and it's just an excuse with lipstick. And I don't care. Don't be late again. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
And people, they say things to their bosses that aren't exactly true, and you were there to see it. And if they're fudging, they're giving themselves a soft landing, and they've got another reason that's just an excuse with lipstick. And they don't say what they mean and mean what they say all the time. And all these little soft excuses and this failing to get all the way there in the things that you do, something as simple as being on time or telling the truth, or especially raising your hand and taking responsibility for something that went wrong. I think the whole world could do a better job at that. The founder of the Other Side Academy that recruited me and another gentleman to come to Salt Lake and start the Other Side Academy, he's a really successful businessman and a 5-time New York Times best-selling author. His name is Joseph Grenny. He wrote Crucial Conversations, which is a really important book. And, he's a social scientist. So the whole world's like an ant farm to him, right? And I remember when we were new, he sat down, we were teaching him the tenets of therapeutic communities and how we sort of beat these things in, if you will, to the students, because they're kind of a hard scrabble group, and they work better with a 2x4 than a feather. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And explaining this to him, he said one day, and I'll never forget this, he said, "Wow, this is amazing. The whole world should have to go to the Other Side Academy for a couple of years, not just criminals and drug addicts. And I never forgot that because I thought it was an absolutely brilliant statement that's so true. And these 3 years since I've been in that environment have made me realize, and it's spinning around in my head all the time. It's like, golly, we should figure out a way to take these protocols, these tenets, these principles of a therapeutic community, and mainly the importance of accountability, integrity, and figure out a way to bring it into everybody's home so they can run their family like that, you and your 7 siblings, take it into our church or our synagogue, take it into our business, and set up accountability groups, set up a bench in every locale so people can learn to tell the truth. The bench is a symbolic sort of portal between your old life and your new one. Every therapeutic community has a bench right by the front door. When you come in to take your interview, you take a seat on the bench. And depending on who you are, we'll leave you sit there for 30 minutes or maybe 3 days, depending on what we know about you, to test your commitment to how much you want a new life. But that bench is strategically placed by the front door. So as you sit there, you can see the people at the greeting desk. You can see a couple of things on the wall that has some of the principles we live by. You can see the men and women coming by, and you can see all the tattoos, but you can see that they're carrying themselves in a way that you're not used to. And it gives you an idea of what you're asking to be a part of. So that's important. But also, anytime you're there, and no matter how long you've been there, if you get in trouble, your superior, your mentor, the director can say, hey, Paul, go take a seat on the bench. And you know, oh shit, I'm in trouble. I've done something wrong. And when you're new, you're thinking, oh my God, did they catch me doing this? Did they find out about that? Because, you're still dirty and you're still sneaky, and we know all that. But we'll tell you, Paul, take a seat on the bench. And we'll leave you there for a long, long time. And then we'll take you into the honor room or, wherever we sit, the room where everybody knows discipline is meted out and where they know you cannot tell a lie in that room, or the consequences are extremely severe. That okay, it's time to give it up. And then we will give you a chance, Paul, when we take you off the bench and take you in the honor room. You know why you're here, Paul? And you'll probably say, oh, maybe I do. Or maybe you'll, and then we'll get there eventually. Sometimes we'll just put your ass back on the bench until your memory gets better. Or you'll come in and you go, yeah, I know why I'm here. I did this, 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 and this, and this is why, and this is who else was involved, stuff like that. That's how you keep the house clean, and that's how you teach Paul to tell the truth. How you teach Paul or Alan, somebody that hadn't been accountable for 30 years, how you teach Alan to be accountable, to raise your hand and say, yeah, I did that. Let me have my consequences so I can get over it and move on.
I see this in so many other aspects of life. But I had a friend of mine, or a person that I knew at the gym. He tried to train obese people, extremely obese people. And his program was to have them come to the gym, get dressed out. And then he says, all I need you to do is ride the bike for 5 minutes or walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes. So he would have them walk on the treadmill. He said, you need to do this for a month. And at the end of a month, he says, we're going to be able to change your pattern. So they'd walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes. And then at the end, he'd say, okay, that's enough. And he'd let him go get a coffee or a tea or whatever else might be at the gym. And it was over. Somewhere around the 20th day, he'd start to say, oh man, I'm kind of in a rush. Let's go ahead and we'll just do 4 minutes today. He said he knew he had his success when people would go, no, I'm going to do my 5 minutes. And he said, yeah, he said, the key was, I said, so it's repetition. He goes, oh, no. He goes, you think it's repetition. He goes, I had to get them to quit lying to themselves. He said, they lie to themselves when they say, I'm not going to eat those French fries. They lie to themselves when they say, I'm not going to eat that bag of potato chips. They lie to themselves when they say, I'm going to start working out. Once I got them to the point where they said, I'm doing 5 minutes, and they committed to it, and then they do it, they've begun to learn the importance of not just telling the truth to other people, but more importantly, telling the truth to yourself, sticking by what you say to yourself.
That, my friend, is accountability. And in the therapeutic community, we call it 200% accountability. The reason is because 100% is the accountability to the person on the treadmill, to themselves, to meeting their goals, to doing what they said they were going to do. And that is critical. He's right about that. But in a therapeutic community, and when your 7 siblings were sitting around, it's also the other 100% is being accountable for the people in that room. You're not only accountable for yourself, but you're accountable for your brother. You're accountable for the sister that's yelling at him, that did the same thing he did today, yesterday. You're accountable for everybody. And so you call out everybody. You tell on everybody, if you want to call it that. And as you can imagine, in a therapeutic community, that is one of the biggest hurdles to overcome when you first get there. Because on the street or in prison or jail, the code is you don't rat on anybody. Being a rat will get you killed in prison. Being a rat is frowned upon on the street. I mean, it'll get you cut out, it'll get you beat up, it'll get you killed. In a therapeutic community, you're telling them to reverse that code and flip it on its head, to tell on everybody. If you see something, say something. I'm not a rat. Yeah, but you're here trying to change your life. You're trying to flip your life 100%. And if you really care about somebody, do you want them stealing a cookie? Do you want them taking a pair of pants that doesn't belong to them? Do you want them to get by with being late when we all demand that everybody be punctual? If you really care about them, you're not telling on them, you're pulling them up. You're helping them do better by pointing out where they've fallen short.
All right. So I'm going to ask you a question, and this is about my mission. I'd love to have your opinion on it. But my mission is to try and help give people agency. And that includes both personal agency as well as political agency. So I'm an independent today. I used to be a Democrat. But one of the things that I recognized in politics was there was this sense of tribalism, right? There'd always be an extremist on the right, an extremist on the left. They would begin to create factions. They'd gain power inside the party because of the low turnout elections. But what moderates would do on the right and on the left is they would try to, once they knew they could no longer defend the excesses of their party, instead of saying, I don't agree with it, they'd say, well, what about the other party? Well, what about the other candidate that's running? Well, look at what they're doing wrong. Moral equivalence began to become the issue. What I recognized when I did that was that I was losing agency for myself. That all of a sudden I wasn't holding my group to the same accountability level that I was trying to expect the other side to hold their level to. And a lot of people in the public would watch it and become disenfranchised because they understood that's what my side was doing and what the other side was doing. The idea of accountability in politics, to me, ideology allows us to say there's good and evil. And instead of thinking, hey, there's good and evil inside of me, I have both good, the propensity to do good, and I have the propensity to do evil. Instead, what I do is I say, you know what? My group is good, that group is evil. And so I export that evil inside of me, and all of a sudden I begun to objectify them, and I lost accountability for who I am. I'd love your thought on that in our political system as to whether or not you see accountability as well as the issue of integrity being important.
Well, yeah, as I was listening to you, Paul, I'm thinking, well, he just really succinctly described our political reality in the United States today. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. Talk about tribalism. We can't even have conversations across the aisle anymore. I mean, it's the worst I've ever seen it. And I think accountability and integrity, or the lack thereof, in Washington, D.C., and I'll put the media in there too, they don't do anybody any favors because everybody's on one side or another. It's not journalism anymore. It's just propaganda. And the political parties are, what a mess that we've got ourselves into now. And it's dangerous. It depresses all of us, and it makes all of us feel helpless. I know I feel more helpless right now with our political reality. I feel like the whole world is a tinderbox, and we're just one or two wrong moves from, the whole thing blowing up, if not just figuratively, maybe literally. And I think that's where integrity and an account, and I don't know how we get from where we are back to that, if it was ever that in the first place. I think social media and immediate communication and 24/7 news, I think it's made the problems seem worse to us because we're inundated with it constantly. Before, you'd watch Walter Cronkite, for 30 minutes, and you'd hear some of it, but not most of it, and it seemed like news instead of opinion. And now everything's opinion. So,
isn't the way that you get there? If I'm thinking about like what you would do in these social settings that you had, my guess is you had people who came in who were members of gangs, who were members of violent gangs, and people who had done things that were terribly wrong. So the question is, how do you get them to break out of it? It's not really the integrity and accountability issue that makes them want to break out of it. It's that they want something better for their life. They make that decision. And the integrity and accountability is how they get there, how they get to having something better. My view of how we fix this in politics is start with us, start with me. I have to be accountable for what I say. I have to be accountable to quit defending someone when I know they're wrong just because I think they're on my side of the ledger, right? And I have to apply some integrity to that. And that means sometimes being fair to the other side, even though I may not want them to win. But why am I doing that? Well, I'm positive of this. If you don't have accountability, then what happens is if someone steals your agency, when they steal your agency, they can also begin to make you believe things that will keep you from making the decisions that will make your life better. If you believe the economy is going to be destroyed because of the other side who's going to be elected, which both candidates today at the presidential level are saying, and the other candidate wins, right? You may go, I'm not going to make any investments. That's the wrong standard, right? It's just the wrong standard. What they're saying doesn't really matter. What you should be doing is look at real data points as opposed to false data points being given to you by someone who's running in politics. But if you don't hold yourself accountable, you become more suspect to being drawn into something that really you didn't want to be drawn into.
Well, like they say, be the change that you want to see. I mean, that is so true. And I agree with you that it all starts with us as individuals. I said at the top that if we could take those two, accountability and integrity, those two tenets of a therapeutic community, and apply them in our home, apply them at work, apply them in our church or place of worship, apply them in our golf club, wherever we go, if we could be that change we want to see, we have to start somewhere. And in politics, everybody's guilty. I mean, some of them wear a red tie and some of them wear a blue tie, but you could make the argument that they all lie. They're all out for themselves and nobody's really looking out for us. That's how I feel. I feel like they're on the hill and the people that should be screaming to the other side about one thing or vice versa, nobody's doing that. They're all having steak dinner together and you and I are arguing on Facebook. It's ridiculous.
Yes. Okay. So help me now think about a personal relationship. You said you've been married a couple of times. I don't know if you're back in a relationship now or not, but how do those two issues help you with a spouse or with someone that you love or someone that you want to spend your life with?
Let me go back and say one more thing, because you said something about, people come from prisons and, they don't act right and they have to want to change. It's not just because of being in an environment of accountability and integrity will make them act right, but it will. There's a saying that, even a sailor knows not to cuss in church. And when you see these guys come in from prison, guys that are sworn to kill the other side if they see them anywhere, and in the 3 therapeutic communities I spent 15 years in, I never saw one single fight. And people ask, well, how do you get them to behave like that when that's not at all what they've been used to their whole life? You tell them deadpan. We ask them not to. And when they come in and they see other people just like them acting right and not causing fights and just getting along, they automatically know to do the same thing. Environment has a really critical role in this. If you can set the culture and the environment, then you bring somebody into it, they'll act right. If we could get our politicians to be honest and not take bribes and not to lie every time they get on TV, we would see that behavior and we would try to emulate it. But we see them, we see them tell stories. We see them lie. We see them stretch the truth. We see them not fulfill their promises. And so there's zero accountability and zero integrity. And now all the three-letter agencies are going through a rough spot on a PR front. There's no faith in anything anymore, not even the Supreme Court. I'm not saying whether any of it's fair or not. I'm just saying it's the environment we've created, and it's almost so overwhelming. Everybody gets into a self-preservation mode, and I can't worry about the bigger picture. I just got to protect mine or get mine. And I think
So to me, in listening to this, I think about this ideal that you create a perfect environment, or an environment where accountability and integrity are integral. And I can see where someone comes into that environment, they almost don't have to have a desire to want to be better. They're going to start to fit the mold. But at some point, they're going to leave that environment and they're going to go get into a business or into a personal relationship or have to deal with family members. And the other members may or may not share that same set of values. So how does the individual, when they leave, begin to cope with the outside environment? And I would like to start with marriage. How do they cope with a personal relationship like that?
Well, I am married again, and the third time's a charm. And I was married once in my 20s, once in my early 30s. I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief with them, just like I was with everybody else in my life. I ruined two perfectly good marriages and let two really good women down because I was who I was and not who I told them I was. Okay, so there's that. Then I spent about 30 years thinking I don't want to do that again. And I was sort of just, meandering through the wilderness until I got to Delancey Street. And then I had to stay 2 years. I stayed 6, and I completely reinvented myself from the first time I hit the trash can or picked up the paper towel and put it in the trash can. And so then I graduated. While I was still in Delancey Street, I met somebody on a home visit through my sister, a really wonderful woman, and she was everything that I'd ever dreamed and that I could want and what I wanted to be when I got out. She was honest. She was a hard worker. She'd raised a daughter by herself after her husband died. She was friends with everybody she'd known since kindergarten. I mean, a real stand-up, classy human being. And I was near the end of my stay at Delancey Street. We met. We started dating after that. And to make a long story short, after less than a year of being out of Delancey Street, I was working in the oil fields up in North Dakota. Mimi lived in Albuquerque, and I asked her to marry me. And I was so excited, and I'd already gotten this job in Salt Lake City, or shortly thereafter I got that job offer, and we were going to come out to Salt Lake, and we had this whole life planned. And then she got a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. So about a month after putting a ring on her finger, instead of planning our wedding, we were planning her end of life. And it was really hard, and that year really taught me a lot. Yeah, it was really tough. And it turns out that the best gift that Mimi ever gave me was by being witness to the grace and the dignity to which she died. And she even told me when we went, there's always that fateful doctor appointment. I mean, we were trying all kinds of things, conventional treatments and non-conventional treatments, but I'll never forget the doctor's appointment we went to where they sit her down and they say, well, Mimi, we think that you should, if you can, quit work. You should spend time with your daughter. You should get your final, your affairs in order. And that was that appointment that, you don't have much more time. And I remember driving home. Neither one of us said a word. When we got back to her apartment, she laid down. She was tired. She was always tired. And, and I was sort of propped up against the headboard on the bed. And we sat there for a long time without saying anything. And then I started getting mad. I was mad at God. I was mad at Mimi. I was mad at me. I was mad at you, Paul, and I didn't know you yet. I was mad at everybody. And I just told her, I said, this is so unfair. If there was a God, how can he take somebody so pure and so good as how I described her already? I said, all of that, me, I've been a lying, duplicitous POS my whole life. I've had guns in my mouth. I've held other people up. I've done every drug to man. I've been a horrible human being my whole life, and I'm as healthy as a horse, and you're dying. How is that fair? I threw the pillow across the room and knocked the lamp off the nightstand. It was ugly, and she listened to the whole thing, right? And then finally she said, "Are you done?" Yeah, I guess. And she goes, okay, so first of all, you have no right to get mad. This is God's plan. It's not ours to understand. It just is what it is. And, you don't need to feel sorry for yourself right now, Alan. You're not even the one dying. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about Katie. That's her daughter. She goes, you're right. You should be dead. You've done horrible things. You should have been dead 10 times over, but you're not. You're alive. And that too is part of God's plan. What you need to do is quit feeling sorry for yourself and quit worrying about me. We'll deal with this however best we can, but you need to go back to Salt Lake and continue to save as many lives as you can. That's God's plan for you. You're really good at it. So go back and do that and let me worry about me. And I was like, okay, how are you going to argue with that, right? And so that was the best gift she gave to me. And the reason I told you that story is because watching her die and the way she did it with such dignity and grace gave me permission and taught me how to love my wife now. Nicole is her name. If not for what Mimi taught me, I wouldn't be able to love Nicole the way I do.
That's beautiful.
And Nicole would be the first person to tell you that our marriage is all because of the gift that Mimi gave me. And so when you talk about going through a therapeutic community and reinventing my entire life and trying my best to live a life of integrity and accountability and how it affects marriage, well, first of all, I'm lucky that my wife is, kind of a really good person, and she had her own struggles. She went through AA, but she had her own period of life where she was a hot mess, and she got well. And she's got, not as much time as I have, but over 10 or 12 years of sobriety now, and she has a high degree of integrity. She's a really on it to a fault almost. But the one problem she did have was punctuality, and it was a real problem for us, because I am 10 minutes early to everything. And I believe that if you're, early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. And Nicole was never on time for anything. And so we struggled through that. And it's a great example of, she just thinks, if you're within 15 minutes, that's fashionably late and that's good enough. And because that's how most of the world works, like I was talking about before. With me, I'm like, absolutely not. That's not the way it's going to go for me. And when you do that to me, I take it as a personal insult that you don't care about what's important to me. And when I finally explained it to her like that, she goes, that made sense to me. I don't really care about being on time as much as you do, Alan. I think you're kind of weird about that. She said, but I do care about me respecting your wishes. That's what made me be punctual. So I think it's just the way you approach those differences, and and then you don't judge, but you just inform, and then you share that, okay, I'll give you 5 of what you want, and you give me 5 of what I want, and punctuality was one. And then there's one more funny story. This is my favorite Nicole story. When we first started dating, I was living at the other side Academy, and when we first met, I would go over and see her and everything. And she sent me a funny text after we'd been seeing each other a little bit. About 2 weeks into it, she sends me a text and says, hey, Alan, would you like to be my boyfriend? And I thought that was so cute, because she really is a cutie, and she's a lot younger than me. And I thought, oh, this is awesome. And so I didn't know how to answer it. I showed a couple of friends. I was kind of freaked out. I didn't want to screw it up, right? And then finally I said, I think that would be a great idea. So then I went over to her house like we always did a couple times a week. We took our dog for a walk and went and got gelato at this little place in the neighborhood. And so when we were walking, I told her, I said, so listen about this boyfriend stuff. Nicole, oh, I got to go back to the first day we met. We finally got together for lunch. And then later that day, she called me and said, hey, I'm going to a movie tonight. Would you like to join me? And so I went to the movie with her that night. So we'd gone to lunch, which is the first time we'd gone out. We went to that movie that night, and we've basically been together every day since. And that was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago now. So then back to when I went to her house about the boyfriend text. And I said, I love the idea of being your boyfriend, but here's the deal with me. I said, I've got one thing that's a deal breaker. It's non-negotiable. I have to have a relationship that has completely 100% transparency, no secrets, none about anything. It's just because of the life I've lived and the way I treated my marriages. I can never have anything that even comes close to that. I have to have 100% transparency. If you can deal with that, we're on. And she goes, oh, okay. Well, I have a confession. And I said, already? And she said, yeah.
First minute.
I really wasn't going to a movie that night. Uh-huh. And so that's how our relationship started. And so Nicole, besides just being a good person, I think we both, because she's just a good person by nature, not unlike Mimi was, and because of the way I've learned to live, I think we've been a positive influence on each other. And I think anybody that's willing to accept criticism and be accountable for their mistakes in a relationship, if you apply those same sort of things we've been talking about to a marriage, it works as good as it does with, long-term drug addicts and criminals. It just enhances the relationship, and you both, help each other rise to the best of your ability.
All right. So because I'm also a CEO, I'm going to pick your brain on one last thing. If you were creating a company today, you were creating an organization, how would you utilize those two tools to create the right culture inside of a company?
That's an easy answer. Remember when I told you about the bench? The bench is that, metaphorical portal between your old life and your new one. I think there should be a bench in the entryway of every home. I think there should be a bench in the conference room or in the entryway. You want it in the entryway because if somebody's on the bench, you want the whole world to see them, because that is powerful when you wonder, ooh, are they in trouble? Ooh, are they a new guy? And the guy sitting on the bench is like, oh my God, everybody's going to ask me about this, and I have to tell them the truth. This is horrible. I'm never going to do this again. It's a very powerful tool. And I think every home, every business should have a bench. And if I was starting a company, I would institute this culture right away. I would have 100% accountability from me, the CEO, to the guy that works in the mailroom. I would have accountability groups, I don't know, periodically, as often as possible. Once or twice a week would be ideal if you could do it. And then in that room, the mail clerk has as much power as I have. He can call me out for parking in the parking space that was for the employee of the month, or leaving a mess on the lunch table, the same way I can call him out for not delivering my mail on time or giving me somebody else's mail. We are equals, and I have to be just as accountable as him, and somebody can put me on the bench just like I could put them on the bench. Everybody is equal, just like you and your 7 siblings. When everybody knows that there's no power hierarchy, that everybody is the same when it comes to accountability, integrity, everybody gives you more.
And that's a powerful tool.
It's transformative. It would work the same in business if you could get people to do it, but most people won't, because most bosses think because they're the boss, they can, they get a pass where you don't. I'm accountable, but he's not, because, he's the boss. And as long as then everybody's just looking out for themselves. But if everybody is held to the same degree of accountability, everybody respects the boss more, because he walks the same walk he asks me to. And everybody, that way people will work harder for you in your absence than they will for you in your presence. Because in your absence, they want to show you that they are living up to the standards that you've shown them you want at your company.
All right. I think you should write that book. You talked to me about that before the show. You should write that book. What would you call it? I've got a thought for a name for you.
Well, you know what the working title is? Diaries of a Dope Fiend.
Oh, I like that.
I only say that because all these lessons I learned, I never would have learned any of them had I not been a completely lost and broken man because of drugs and criminality. And all these things I've learned, through the lessons of that onward life are what make me appreciate them and hold them so dear.
All right, so I'll give you my suggestion after listening to you. That'd be my subtitle, Diary of a Dope Fiend.
Okay.
My title after listening to this entire show is The Bench.
There you go.
Yep, that tool of it's a very it's a visual tool as well as a tool that works, where when people think about it and they understand it, they recognize the power of sitting on that bench. I can imagine. I mean, I was 2 minutes late for you today, and I came
Yes,
in and
you
I
are.
apologized. And then you brought up being late about 25 times in the show, and I'm like, gosh, dang it, right?
Yeah.
But
But I'm used to it. That's how all of you out here act.
it's perfect. It's exactly what you should do. And I could see where, as the CEO, I may ought to have to sit out on a bench in my own company while and think about, hey, I'm about to walk into this meeting and I'm going to be held accountable by everybody for being 2 minutes late.
And if we didn't put you on the bench, all we would do is give you some community service. If you and I were working for the same company, I would, after this was over, I'd say, by the way, Paul, you got 2 hours for being late. And that means instead of at 5 o'clock or whenever you go home, instead of going home and working in your lawn, you got to stay around the office and empty the trash cans and clean the bathrooms and clean the kitchen. And you got to do your 2 hours. Then you get to go home. So you cost me 2 minutes, which cost you 2 hours. You do that 2 or 3 times, you'll quit being late.
That's a fact. Yep, that is a fact. Alan, I have loved this conversation. It's been beautiful. Thank you so much for being on The Optimistic American.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining The Optimistic American Show. Now, help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.